Ahoy! My name is Kevin Perger, and welcome to another edition in Defunctland. For background/context on this series, please visit thepurge.com with the link below. Another bit of housekeeping for today's episode, I now have a Patreon. I know Patreons are everywhere and some of you are probably tired of hearing about them, but I told myself that if I made it to 10,000 subscribers, I would start one, and I never thought I would get there. So thank you to everyone, this is just incredible. I want to be clear, donating to this Patreon is going to help me continue to make videos regularly and work on Defunctland VR, but it is not a direct donation to any specific VR project. I think I have some interesting perks, some of which have fairly high monetary goals that I don't expect to be fulfilled anytime soon. Also, just because you don't donate to the Patreon does not mean you cannot still contribute to Defunctland with your creativity. It's just to help me continue to produce content, and I will never turn anyone's ideas away just because you aren't donating. That said, if you have a few extra bucks, go to the link in the description below, and I'd be really thankful if you'd help me out. Alright, back to the episode. Today, we will be attempting to resurrect Disneyland's extinct attraction, Submarine Voyage, and Walt Disney World's extinct attraction, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea Submarine Voyage. The first iteration of this attraction was found at Disneyland in 1959, but its beginnings date all the way back to the film that was released in 1954. This was suggested by a lot of you, too many to name, but I do want to include you all in this video, so I will do that now. The film 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, based on the 1870 Jules Verne novel, was released on December 23, 1954. The film was both a commercial and critical success for Walt Disney Productions, which was still somewhat new to strictly live-action films at the time, having only been making them for less than 5 years. The film was praised for its stunning visuals and set design, being nominated for 3 Academy Awards and winning 2 of them. 7 months after the film's release, Disneyland opened to the public. During its construction, Disneyland ran into numerous budget cuts, and Tomorrowland, being the last land in the park to be constructed, felt the impact of these the most. When it opened with Disneyland, it served mainly as an area for corporate showcases, with companies such as American Motors and Richfield Oil having their own displays. On opening day, Tomorrowland housed Autopia, the only opening day attraction to still be operating today, Rocket to the Moon, the Monsanto Hall of Chemistry, the Aluminum Hall of Fame, Space Station X-1, Circarama USA, Phantom Boats, and Clock of the World. For the most part, these seem to be hilariously mundane attractions, and all of them together at once might make an interesting addition to Defunctland, but the main idea is that this is not what Walt imagined when he first envisioned Tomorrowland. In an attempt to save a large portion of the new park, Disney decided to open an exhibit in this area, and lucky for them, they had a relevant, popular, and visually stunning film to display. On August 3, 1955, less than 3 weeks after Disneyland opened, the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea exhibit debuted in Tomorrowland. Despite it being put together under a time and budget crunch, the exhibit was surprisingly detailed and impressive. It took guests through the Nautilus, the submarine from the film, where they got to experience its final resting place, its various control rooms, Nemo's organ, which is now in the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland, and encounter the film's giant squid. The attraction was a hit and lasted all the way to 1966, when Disney became frustrated with the design and expansions to Tomorrowland and decided to renovate the entire area with new attractions. But this was of course not the end of the film's inclusion in Disney parks. 4 years after the opening of Disneyland in 1959, the first large expansion came to the park, which greatly affected Tomorrowland. The first 3 e-ticket attractions opened. In case you aren't aware, Disneyland and Disney World, until 1982, used a per-attraction ticket system. After the expansion in 1959, there were 5 categories of attractions, A through E. A being simple rides such as carriages and the King Arthur Carousel, B was slightly more immersive with Motorboat Cruise and the Swiss Family Treehouse, C was rides like Peter Pan's Flight and Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, D included Flight to the Moon and Skyway, and E was for the thrill rides at the park. E-ticket is now even a term used to describe an exhilarating experience, and the first 3 e-ticket attractions to come to Disneyland all happened to be in the then mundane Tomorrowland. These attractions were the Matterhorn bobsleds, the monorail, and Submarine Voyage. Submarines at this time were still considered a future technology. They had gained prominence in World War II, but they were quickly evolving in the late 50s due to the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. In fact, the United States launched its own Nautilus in 1954, which could last underwater for 4 months at a time. So when it came to expand Tomorrowland, the Imagineers' vision was clear. They were already going to the skies with Rocket to the Moon, they would go to the top of mountains with the Matterhorn, glide the landscape with the monorail, and explore the depths of the ocean with Submarine Voyage. The new water attraction would replace the Tomorrowland boats, an opening day attraction in which guests could drive a small boat around the Tomorrowland lagoon. There were a lot of issues with the engine heat and smoke, especially when guests tried to speed up the boat. In order to solve this, Disney redesigned these boats and added a skipper to each one so the guests would no longer be in control. They were also renamed the Phantom boats in 1956, but would close shortly after this due to continued technical issues and the increased cost of employing a skipper for each boat. This attraction lasted only a year, being one of the shortest-lived attractions ever at Disneyland and the first to be removed. This left the Tomorrowland Lagoon vacant for a new water attraction, but it wouldn't be until 1958 that Disney had a good idea for it. Imagineers originally pictured a boat with a glass bottom riding through the lagoon, allowing guests to look down at the underwater life. Walt's plan was more ambitious. He wanted the guests to be underwater, looking out of portholes in their very own submarine ride. He even originally wanted to have live fish, but this proved too difficult, so the switch to animatronics was made. The lagoon was drained, a show building was constructed, and Submarine Voyage was built. The attraction opened on June 14, 1959, with a christening by Mrs. Mildred Nelson, the wife of the head machinist of the USS Nautilus. The submarines were modeled after those being used in the Cold War. They had a very industrial feel and were painted gray. 8 of them were used in the attraction, each holding 38 guests. The fleet cost over $600,000 to make in 1959, which adjusted for inflation is a pretty heavy price tag for just the ride vehicles. But it more than pleased Walt. His vision of Tomorrowland was finally becoming realized, and he was particularly happy with his submarines. In September of 1959, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev visited the United States and was famously denied a trip to Disneyland due to security reasons. Walt was apparently disappointed by this because he looked forward to showing Khrushchev his fleet of submarines. Submarine Voyage had a 1,365-foot trail that would guide guests through the underwater life. Guests would climb down into their cramped submarine, where it was so tight that the chairs had to retract so guests could get in and out. This was notoriously claustrophobic, hot, and humid at times, but given the design and concept, it was impressively manageable. Pre-recorded captain narrations played throughout the attraction, describing the sea life and giving nautical commands that add to the magic of convincing the guests that they were diving underwater. And in case you aren't aware, they actually weren't. The submarine was not actually a submarine, but a boat with a level below the waterline. Guests would technically be underwater, but they would never go any deeper than they did when they entered the sub. And if they looked up during the outside portions of the ride, they could clearly see the waterline. As the submarine leaves the dock, a large amount of bubbles are produced at an angle to make it appear as though the submarine is diving further below the surface. A simple but genius effect that was convincing enough for the general public and children, despite the fact that the first set of bubble jets could actually be seen from the outside from the loading dock. The guests would first experience animals such as sea turtles, lobsters, and clams. Then they were informed that a storm is approaching, so to avoid it, they dived deeper. The effect was more convincing than the last, because on top of having the angled bubbles, the submarine was also entering a show building under a waterfall, making it seem that the submarine had dived into the depths of the ocean and hiding the waterline above. Guests encounter wrecked ships, a shark, and deep-sea divers before the captain catches word that there is a polar ice cap ahead. They dive deeper again into darkness, where they see color-changing fish and a massive giant squid. They continue on their way, with the captain pointing out the mermaids, wondering if he is hallucinating or if they are actually real. They pass by the lost continent of Atlantis and its volcano, before seeing a long, cross-eyed sea serpent. The captain is convinced he is hallucinating and begins to take the submarine up again. The submarine coasts into the dock and guests exit. The 8 submarines each had a different name: Nautilus, Seawolf, Skate, Skipjack, Triton, George Washington, Patrick Henry, and Ethan Allen. If one of the submarine's portholes had a leak, a cushion from the operator could be used to plug it. The lagoon required 9 million gallons of water to be filled, and if you remember the Defunctland on Jaws the Ride, that lagoon only required 5 million gallons. So Submarine Voyage needed nearly twice that amount of water. Every night, divers would swim to the bottom of the lagoon to pick up debris and sometimes even repair the animatronics. From 1965 to 1967, live mermaids inhabited the attraction. Along with the on-ride mermaid animatronics, Disney paid female cast members $1.65 per hour to sunbathe and swim in mermaid costumes for 4 hours a day during the summer. This ended after mermaids experienced health issues from the chlorine in the water and exhaust from the submarines. Also, guests taking pictures of them were blocking traffic to the Matterhorn. The show building of Submarine Voyage was made for strength, because the roof of it was landscaped and home to a large portion of the Autopia tracks, a section of the monorail, and part of the People Mover. Submarine Voyage was a huge success, and in the early years of Disneyland, it helped solidify the power of attraction storytelling and detail. The The animatronics looked great, especially for being underwater, and the soothing narration and storytelling made for a fantastic ride. 12 years after the ride's opening in 1971, Walt Disney World Resort opened to the public. Magic Kingdom's Tomorrowland, like Disneyland, was unfinished, but it was even more barren, with only the Grand Prix Raceway and Skyway present on opening day. It would be another few years before the vision of Tomorrowland was fully seen. The vision would look further into the future of technology and focus more on space travel and exploration, with attractions such as Starjets and Space Mountain. At the same time, Disney wanted to bring Submarine Voyage to the Florida park, but the theming would not allow it. Submarines were no longer the future, but the Imagineers had an idea. If they were able to re-theme Submarine Voyage as a fantasy adventure, then they could place it in Fantasyland instead of Tomorrowland, and luckily for them, they had just the property to do it. Looks like this episode is going to be another two-parter. While I didn't want to do this, I like to keep each episode under 15 minutes, but I also didn't want to cut any information that I think you would have found interesting. So I'll be back next episode with the opening of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea Submarine Voyage and the fate of both rides. Until then, thank you for watching, and don't forget to comment, share, and subscribe.